The reaction, not just in Japanese assets, but globally, has been very bullish, very positive to the announcement of this US-Japan trade deal. What do you think the knock-on effects are going to be for other countries around the Asia region? Do you think that this is perhaps a positive template for other countries to follow?
Well, I think the US-Japan trade deal obviously got a lot of the headlines today, but actually, if you have seen in recent days, Indonesia, Philippines also got a trade deal. So I think it's a good start. Definitely all these trade deals coming in before the 1st August deadline, it does give hope for the other Asian countries to also try and squeeze in their own trade agreements before the deadline itself. But I think the very important thing about the Japanese deal, I would say it's really the 550 billion commitment that Japan will invest in the US. When is it going to materialize? And how is that going to shape up in terms of the US labor market? Because it's supposed to create hundreds of thousands of jobs anyway. Second point, really, I think it sets a template for the US-EU trade negotiations that is currently underway, especially for key sectors like autos and potentially aircraft and the other industries as well, because that will be the other big trade agreement that I think markets will be looking out for. So it got a little bit noisy this morning with the news about Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba's impending departure. But I think for ASEAN economies, generally, I would say that as long as the eventual tariffs that will kick in on 1st August is lower than what was initially announced during Liberation Day, that will be perceived as a bit of a win. It will lend a bit of a positive spin, I think, for risk-on market sentiments. And I do think that the momentum from now till the end of the month probably is going to be more such announcements coming on stream. Whether it's going to be completely a sweet deal for Asian countries, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but very good points on Philippines, on Vietnam, on Indonesia, other countries as well around the world inking those deals. But I guess, for Japan, there was so much focus on the auto industry there and what would happen, whether there would be a carve-out. Let me ask you about the big one, US-China. Bloomberg has been reporting recently that it seems as though the US administration is softening their tone somewhat vis-a-vis China, and there is a real possibility of a Trump-Xi summit at some point in Q3 or beginning of Q4. How do you see those negotiations panning out versus what expectations are right now?
I think the US-China trade agreement is going to be a little bit more tricky and probably potentially more challenging because it will have to be perceived as a win-win for both sides in order to come to a conclusion. So from China's point of view, having to give away some potential sacred cows, but still being able to achieve a much lower tariff level, I think would be a face-saving maneuver of sorts for the Chinese policymakers. So for the US side, I think there's clear indication that they are willing to strike a deal. It's a question of how the deal is going to be tilted between the US and Chinese side. But given that talks are ongoing and probably, hopefully, we'll see a potential announcement before 1st August, if not in quick order after that. So I really wouldn't rule out a Trump-Xi summit at some point, but it may or may not happen before 1st August. I think for China, they are really grappling with a lot of domestic challenges, both on the consumer confidence side and deflation.
So I want to pick you up on that because, what I did want to ask you is how much you think the fortunes of the Chinese economy are dependent on them getting a trade deal with the U.S. as we speak about some of the challenges domestically, the anti-involution drive, and trying to beef up competitiveness. How is that linked to the trade deal discussions?
So I think the anti-involution measures are ongoing. They are trying to fight off this deflationary period that they have in the Chinese economy, where industrial profits continue to be eroded and prices are falling, especially on the wholesale side. So if they do get a US-China trade deal, hopefully that would mean that export demand coming from the US would actually pick up again, and that would actually alleviate some pressure on the exporters, manufacturers in the Chinese economy. But I would say it's more like providing a floor in terms of the export demand. It may not actually translate into a huge pickup per se, because I think tariff levels, whatever is settled at eventually, is still going to be higher than pre-Trump's trade war 2.0 kind of a story. So I think there will still be continued pressure. It's just a question of the magnitude of the pressure on the Chinese economy from the external front.
Yeah. Are you expecting a large, broad-based fiscal boost on the real estate side to get the economy back on track again?
Well, last week there was a lot of market speculation and hopes for a big boost on the property market, but that really didn't materialize. I think we have to recognize that this time round, in terms of the fiscal ammunition, it may be slightly different from the previous periods. And I think, on top of that, they are probably looking at more gradual type of broad-based measures. So a lot of talk about, reurbanization, potentially giving hook to some of the migrant workers. And I think this is probably going to show itself in more gradual impact, but probably more sustainable in the medium term.
Yeah.